All right. Thank you for turning on the recording. I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on FY 2021 proposed budget revisions and tax levies assembly amendments. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
I am unsure if Ms. Kennedy will be able to join us today.
Okay. Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Presberdia? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
And Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
Great, thank you. As usual, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat. If you can't access the chat, please text me and I'll add you into the queue. Just before we start going through the amendments, which is our duty today, we're scheduled from 12 to 1:30, so we have a little bit of time. I think we have 14 amendments to go through, maybe a little less than that. So we are, of course, going to be debating and voting on these amendments on Tuesday. Today's space isn't necessarily for debate, but it is to ask questions and raise any concerns so that sponsors can make changes over the weekend and on Monday and Tuesday to our amendments before they are back on the floor at our assembly meeting. So with that, let's go ahead and start going through the amendments. So we have Kennedy Amendment number 1. Ms. Allard, are you familiar enough with this amendment to go through it, or I can just read it as presented?
No, Miss Kennedy hasn't discussed it with me.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to read this as presented then for the record. So this amendment seeks to add $20,000 to address the senior center's budget shortfall due to higher insurance costs for employees. I believe Ms. Kennedy has talked about this generally with the body before. The $20,000 is a budget neutral amendment, and she is seeking to use $9,000 from her individual account, as well as $11,000 from the Anchorage Health Department budget to pay for this amendment. Are there any questions? And I'm wondering if we have someone from the administration who can take note of any questions that we have in case we don't get answers to them today, so that we can get answers to questions by some point before Tuesday. Can someone do that?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lance Wilbur at OMB. I will work with Desiree to capture the questions and respond as best we can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm wondering what the health department thinks about this idea. Where do they think this 11,000 is going to come out of their budget? Thanks.
Great, thanks. And just like I stated before, we might not get answers to these questions today, but OMB looks like they'll try to get us answers by Tuesday.
Okay,
okay, so not seeing any other questions on this amendment, we'll go ahead and move on to the next amendment. So this is Constant number 1. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. This proposal would reappropriate the funding that we provided for the body cams at the end of the budget cycle last year. It's $250,000 that came from the alcohol beverage sales tax program. I thought it was general funds, but it's alcohol tax, which limits what those funds can be spent upon. And this appropriation specifically identifies victims for justice and then other grantees who lost funding due to federal budget cuts related to the domestic violence act that was reduced. And this is just bridge one-time funding to help them get through to the end of the year. And so other grantees may be like Awake, who experiences cuts under the same federal reduction. And so the idea is to make this a net neutral amendment.
Thanks. Okay, I'm in the queue next. So did I hear correctly, Mr. Constant, that basically what this is coming from are, actually, rather than guess, can you explain again what you are cutting or changing in the alcohol tax allocations?
Yes, so at the end of last year, in order to ensure we had funding available to start the conversation about body cams, in the fact that there was some concern that the levy wouldn't pass, we appropriated $250,000. And we essentially can, because and you'll see a later amendment, in the mayor's proposed first quarter revisions, they levied $1.5 million for the body cams. And so they project, though, that there's $1.85 million available under that levy. And so the idea is to take the 250 that was from the alcohol tax, already spent, appropriated, maybe not already spent, but appropriated to this category, move those funds into a new category that fund the one-time grants, and then use the levy to pay for the difference. So it actually doesn't come from anywhere else other than the new levy. So the alcohol tax, Prop 4, would pay for the difference. And there, so you'll see like the fourth or fifth one down in my stack there is the actual funding shift.
Okay, thanks. So then I guess a couple additional points. One from the administration, I'd like to confirm if any of that allocation has actually been spent or not. That $250,000 that was allocated in the alcohol tax. And then second, for the sponsor, I think it would be helpful to have a list of the grantees just for the benefit of the public so that they can see who this money might be towards.
Right, and to that point, I certainly identified victims for justice because they came before us, and I wanted to honor that. But Mr. Weddleton has some other ideas, and just one last point: even if they did spend that money, the the special levy can pay for that. Right, we can use the funds from the special levy. And so that means that this money, even if it was spent, can be covered by the levy, and then those funds can be moved over to support this. And so, and I have the resolution that funded the levy. Let me see if I can find the number again. Desiree had sent it to me. It's AR 2021-17S, approved on January 26th of this year. So just FYI, that's where these funds are.
Great, thank you. Ms. Alatel?
Thank you. Question for the sponsor. How is this consistent with the conversation that we had in moving the funds, these funds that you wish to reallocate to defray the taxpayer burden on the body-worn camera and IT upgrades? If I remember the debate and the intent correctly, it was so that we would not have to, in the first year, levy the full amount, and it was an up to amount. So is this a change in tactic, or am I missing something? Because I don't quite understand the intersection of your two amendments. Thank you.
You know, I would offer, no, they're two different things. The alcohol beverage sales tax, this portion of it was already levied and appropriated. So that was already done, separate from the idea of going up on the alcohol tax, which that's the pool we talked about, reserving a measure of it so we can see how much revenue is actually raised. So separately, it's the levy that is passed under Proposition 4 that is what will actually cover these expenses on this amendment that are being shifted over. And so that's what frees up the money. And so it's a different piece of legislation, and it doesn't change the conversation we had about reserving a small amount or a measure of the alcohol beverage sales tax so we understand how much we're going to actually raise.
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So does this mean then, thank you, that we would go ahead and levy up to the 1.85 instead of the 1.5?
Yes, and there's an amendment at the bottom of my stack here that does exactly that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. Yeah, just, I guess a question for Chris then is if you could be more explicit on this one. So I think Victims for Justice issue and then Awake, when they came to us, was there's the Federal Victims of Crimes Act, and they spell it VOCA, VOCA, that got cut dramatically and unexpectedly. And it's, I think that's essentially at least what Victims for Justice and Awake were focusing on, is their losses there. And I think that ties it a little more closely to the alcohol tax too, as opposed to, I think there are a lot of groups that lost funding due to federal budget cuts.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to add in the final language that it is cuts resulting from the VOCA federal act with the reductions. That's definitely 100% the intent. It's not broadly to fund people who've had budget cuts.
Right.
And again,
Yeah,
that
I expected that.
The victims' rights issue is squarely within the alcohol tax purview.
Okay, and Victims for Justice asked for 124,000. If you felt it was appropriate to specify that.
Yeah, and I'm open to amendment on this altogether, however we frame the final package. I just want to make sure that we utilize the opportunity that we have on the special levy from Prop 4 so that we can use the alcohol tax monies as effectively as possible to address current problems. And again, it's one time. We say that right up front.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and move on to constant number 2. Back to you, Mr. Constant.
So this one, when I had drafted these amendments, I believed at the time that the funding that was being moved and discussed in the previous item was general funds, because if you look at the resolution as passed at the last minute, it was changed from general funds to alcohol tax. And so I did not have a funding source for this. So at this time, I may or may not move this one because I want to make sure I do my part, the hard work of identifying a funding source. But just so everyone knows what this is it's an appropriation for a mapping and documentation project that will identify explicit restrictive platting and zoning covenants and restrictions that exist and existed, so that we can map out for the future where we had neighborhoods that had de facto redlining practices going on. It's an equity issue. But again, the funding source at the last minute changed, so I don't have one, so I may or may not move this one.
Thank you. Any questions on this one?
Felix, if I could, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Robbins.
So Chris, what would be the end result here? I mean, just identify this property has a restrictive covenant, and which ones, or is it actually to go back and recreate the plat so that it removes that?
Yeah, so that's a very astute question, John. So I've long wanted to do this because there are kind of two responses you get from people when you talk about this history, like, oh, I didn't know that existed here. Or, there's the other argument of, well, we've gone so far that, what does it matter? And so the first part of the project is to get a map, just basically a map that people can forever go to that identifies the actual restrictive plat, which the note, the covenant, one of them I could point you to on 16th Avenue reads, these properties, and they're the whole plat, so it's like 60 properties, may only be sold or alienated in any way to Americans of the white race. So those kind of things are hot and alive. I think there's another member of the body here who has on their own property deed one of those restrictive covenants. And so the first step is to catalog it. And then the second step, in my opinion, would be to update the plats to remove those restrictions, even though they're unenforceable. It just goes to, the heart of the question that we recognize we had this issue, but in my opinion, you can't remove those those covenants and restrictions without recording them somewhere else. I don't want them on the official documents ever again, but I also don't want that history to disappear, because then you'll have people who say, well, it never happened here. And so this is a long-term equity project. And like I said, I don't have a funding source, so it probably won't be moved, but it's something that you will see come back before the body at some time in the not too distant future.
Okay, could I ask one follow-up? Chris, is $25,000 enough to do this?
So I spoke with David Reamer at the University of Alaska, who's one of the historians operating their history department and a long history in Fairview. And he actually gave me a number less than this, that he believes it would be enough to achieve the project. I added a margin because I too share the sentiment that, whoa, that seems kind of low. But I believe the project can be accomplished for this amount. I have a bid that says it could be accomplished for less.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's just the first phase, which is the map.
All right, seeing no other discussion, let's move on to constant number 3. Back to you, Mr. Constant.
Yep, so this one falls into the same category as the previous one, that I believe that those funds were broadly available, but they're tailored. And so this one doesn't fall within the rubric of the alcohol tax, and therefore it's not eligible, so I don't have a funding source. And as you have heard, the roadmap to a vital and safe Anchorage is a program that is proposed under the rescue plan. However, the burn rate on the funding that they do have has been exceeded, and it's about $10,000 a month for the work that they're doing right now. And so this would buy 3 months while we walk through the appropriating process for the rescue plan, should in fact monies be identified. And so that said, unless and until I find a funding source between now and Tuesday, it's likely that this one also will not be moved.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you. On the funding source, I'm wondering if there's any funding remaining in the discretionary funds under previous allocations with CARES Act or COVID recovery response, that the administration still has to cover this until we move forward, you know, even if it's for, let's see, this is April, we're supposed to get funding under the other. So even if it's for 1 month or 2, maybe less, but I would like to know that.
Same. And, you know, the best case scenario for me would be the administration just makes a determination in the substitute version that this is a worthy cause and adds it without a source, which is why I have it here, just in case. So getting to your question to the administration, I share that question. Are there other sources like CARES Act funding that's remaining or other discretionary funds that could do this as we wait? Because it's vital. This work is so important.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll hear about that by Tuesday. So I'm next in the queue. Do we know at their current burn rate when they will run out of money?
Essentially last week. So folks are just, you know, it's Michael Fredericks and their group that's working on this, and they're working as volunteers right now. And all that's great. You know, volunteers don't put bread and butter on the table.
Got it. Thank you. All right, not seeing any other questions. Let's go ahead and move on to the next amendment, constant number 4. Back to you.
Yep, thanks. So this one is the one that shares the approach that I mentioned, how it would be funded. Moving the $250,000 from the alcohol tax to the special levy. You'll see the number here is $350,000. That is more than I asked for in the first pool, because those funds were only $250,000 available. But this would appropriate, and it could be reduced up to the maximum that's projected for the levy, so that there is a bit of relief between what's needed and what we have available. So this should have been maybe tied to the first one as well. This makes it so that money is available.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any discussion on this one. Let's go ahead and move on to Rivera-Weddleton number 1. Mr. Weddleton, do you mind if I speak on this one?
No, please do.
All right. So as folks may remember, at the Special Rules Committee meeting that was held, I think maybe last Friday, we talked about a variety of different needs, capacity needs within Assembly Counsel's office, Clerk's office, Department of Law. And I think from the members who spoke pretty universally, I understood the highest priority in terms of funding was Assembly Counsel capacity. So what this amendment seeks to do, it seeks to fund a half year of salary and benefits for an assistant Assembly Counsel to come on board in July. Very specifically, this is a one-time request. We will look at finding another avenue to pay for this request in the 2022 budget. And that's because looking at the source to pay for the cost is essentially cutting travel budgets from a variety of different departments as outlined here. Desiree, do you mind scrolling down a little bit? For folks who don't have the amendments in front of them, there you go, thanks. It cuts from the departments as outlined, some of their travel budgets. I do have a question into the administration, which I hope to get an answer from soon, which I asked them, what is their current burn rate on travel dollars? And so hopefully I should get an answer from them soon to make sure that this amendment actually does pencil out. As we all know, our wonderful Assembly Counsel is overworked and overburdened, and he made this request. In fact, this is a request that I have been asking for a couple of years now if Mr. Gates wanted to do this, and it's not until very recently that he said yes. So I think it would be great if we could honor that request from Mr. Gates. That is it from me. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Weddleton?
We also don't have redundancy in our legal staff. And if something happened to Dean, if he just got sick for a week or two, we got COVID in this world, things like that happen, we would be in big trouble because we were laying a lot of stuff on him, and that would screech an awful lot of stuff to a halt. So, it's not just, taking workload off of Dean is, pretty obviously needed, but that redundancy is something that we need to get to.
Thank you. All right, any questions on this one? Ms. Ennis?
Yes, I don't know if this is appropriate time for me to say this, but I believe the municipal attorney's travel budget is mostly in prosecution to fly witnesses and victims of domestic violence into Anchorage trials. So we probably need to double check that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, like I stated, I'm waiting for OMB to let me know what the burn rate is from these different departments so that I can adjust things if this amendment isn't realistic as written right now. Acting Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, you and other Assembly members put together a budget priority memo that included a number of things, including salary equity and adding a special assistant position, both of which we included in 1Q. But this wasn't in the memo. So I'm just wondering, among all of those priorities, what is the most important to the body?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. So this wasn't in the memo because this particular idea didn't come up until after that memo was sent to the administration. So this was sort of a late breaking request from Mr. Gates, who, as you know, and as other members know who have been in Assembly leadership, we've asked Mr. Gates about capacity issues for some time, and it's not until very recently where Mr. Gates has said, yes, I could use some capacity help. So that is why this amendment is being put forward at this time.
May I follow up? I totally understand that, and having worked with Mr. Gates, I know how overworked he is. But in terms of priorities, where this ranks with the other items that you requested that we were able to accommodate in the draft, is there any sense from members about that?
If I might, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
If I had to choose between a new attorney to support Dean or an assistant, I would for sure choose a new attorney.
Thank you. All right, I don't see anyone else in the queue to respond. Anything else on this amendment before we move on?
Just to say thank you, Mr. Constant, and we'll try to make it all work. I just know there are a lot of requests, so just trying to think through that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, this is Pete. I just wanted to say that if we overwork and burn Dean out and we lose him, we would have to hire at least 2 people to replace him.
Yes. And just for the
great
record,
point, Mr. Peterson.
Dean put a note in the chat that said he would choose another attorney as well if he had a choice.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to Constant Zolotel number 1. Who would like to speak to this one?
I will, Mr. Chair. This is the amount required by the Anchorage Fire Department to bring the mobile crisis team on 24/7 in fourth quarter in order to get Medicaid reimbursement for the services or for those that would be eligible for Medicaid billing. It does need to be a 24/7 service. That point was driven home by our consultant. It has the positions, the request from the fire department if we do want to go full-time starting October 1, which I think aligns with the timing right now that we should hear back from the state on Medicaid approval. There's also an attached budget breakdown that was provided by the fire department. The fund source is the funds in the alcohol tax allocation for any programs that have been delayed for implementation due to RFPs not yet having been issued. I think this being a COVID year and the first year of this particular budget, some of the infrastructure just hasn't gotten in place fast enough. And so if we don't have any of that money hit the streets until July 1, we're 6 months in. So I think there's some room for one-time expenditures. This would be a one-time, and then we would be able to review what Medicaid reimbursement came through in the interim as we move into 2022.
Great, thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. Couple of questions on this. One is, so how much of this would the Medicaid reimbursement pay? Are we getting 0 if we're not 24/7? And if we go 24/7, is this a money maker for us? Where do we land?
So it's my understanding we can't bill Medicaid unless we're 24/7. The actual reimbursement rate, I do not know. If I were to go back and look in the prior PowerPoints, and I'm happy to have the clerk's office forward those, we do have kind of the modeling or cost estimates that were put together by our consultants, which suggested that this there would be a large percentage of individuals who would likely qualify as Medicaid service recipients. So I'm happy to recirculate that.
All right, thanks. And then, you know, when we say, you know, any programs delayed because there was an RFP, I mean, essentially, though, it would mean likely ending some programs that we've already approved. So I'd like to know what those might be before agreeing to this.
I appreciate that.
Possible?
I think one, that there are several, we allocated funds for various programs within the alcohol tax that weren't programs in existence. The idea is that RFPs would go out to do work in those categories, and those RFPs haven't been issued. So it's not about cutting anything that's currently in existence. It's just starting at a lower dollar figure for one time, with the full expectation that those funds remain at full amounts in 2020, given the delay for implementation. And I would really leave that to the administration and the health department's discretion based on kind of where implementation of those funds is at present time.
Okay, well, for whoever from the administration is taking notes, if you could indicate which programs this might be pulling money from, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm next in the queue. Yeah, sort of similar question for the administration. I'd like to get a sense of sort of do a check on the math to make sure that there are in fact enough funds that haven't been used as planned to pay for this amendment. I think this is a smart route to take, and I appreciate the sponsors for putting this amendment forward. Thanks. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. And yeah, just to make sure it's clear, it's not that the funds or programs will not happen. It's that they just, because of time, as we recognize with many of the grant programs that we funded 8 months ago, it took 6 months to get them in place. So with that burn rate of time, there is an opportunity. And so we're looking to ensure that we fully use those revenues and then aren't having this conversation in a year about unused revenues related to these programs when we could have used them to start the ball rolling. So, and I value the request to the administration to help us identify which sub-programs and projects were delayed enough because of development time and everything that we need to, or that we have the opportunity to reappropriate the proportionate amount of the funds. And then I also want to just validate what Ms. Zalatel said about the fact that we won't be able to bill Medicaid without a 24/7 program. I didn't know if I believed and remembered this with Ms. Zalatel, so I did my homework and went back and did find it in the service regs that state, in order to be a billable program, you must have 24-hour service. And so, and to the question of what percentage or how much revenue can come, almost everyone will be eligible for Medicaid. Will they have Medicaid is a different issue. And so, but those issues are the ones that are getting sorted out in the implementation of the 1115 waiver program, which is what this falls under. And so the revenue would be probably pretty substantial in relationship to the people who are going to be receiving services, because over time, most of these folks filter through the system. So it's wise for us to be 24/7 so we can capture the revenue. Otherwise, we can't.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. Just last thought here is that I believe when we were really originally looking at the alcohol tax budget and working to make funds work for a variety of programs, we had discussed a conversation at 1Q about making this a 24/7 program at some point this year. Second, that 12-hour program with the current funding could last throughout the year, which is partly due to a little bit of delayed implementation as well. So we have a little more, I guess, wiggle room here where we're looking at that fourth quarter instead of a half year request, which is what I was originally thinking about. And then I would just kind of underline and bold a few times the value of this service and this being the first one and the data that will be collected as Alaska moves forward with its work under Crisis Now and crisis stabilization centers. The data collected in doing this work and the consistency of giving our residents a appropriate behavioral health response instead of sometimes a behavioral health response and sometimes a law enforcement response can't be any more relevant than it is in 2020 and 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing
one last piece
Sure.
from me, Chair, and that is just that what Ms. Zalatel essentially said for the state we can also benefit from, and she said it in the beginning. I want to reinforce the idea that over the first quarter or two of implementation of this program, once it's stood up, we will be able to benchmark and measure the number and percentage of clients that we are serving that are Medicaid eligible. So by the time we hit Q4, and for sure by the first of the year, we'll be able to make accurate projections for the budget process for the future because we're taking this on immediately.
Great, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Weddleton LaFrance, number 1. Who would like to speak to this?
I'll go ahead on this one. You know, I rejoiced early on this. This has been a long festering problem where Girdwood has been taking over the municipality's requirements to provide EMT all across the city and has not been, properly funded for many, many years. And Chiefs Weston and Hetrick got together and came up with a deal with a new contract. It would be $300,000 more a year to cover the EMT, which is certainly a compromise for Girdwood, but it's an improvement and we have progress. That got cut with no explanation to 250,000. And then we heard that, well, because the contract isn't signed yet, it might be signed in June, that it should be prorated down to 175,000. And that's not really the intent of the agreement. The agreement was that it would start and be for the entire year. And that's not unusual for a contract to be signed partway through the year. And we see many of our collective bargaining agreements that go retroactive because the negotiations went long, and negotiations for this have gone long. They've gone on for many years, and we finally have an agreement and we should honor it. So this simply restores 125,000 to get us up to 300,000. And you should understand too that this is not some special deal for Girdwood. This is, the Girdwood Fire and Rescue contracts to cover the, emergency medical services that are an area-wide service that we're all taxed for. And with the current situation, the Girdwood Fire, they tax themselves for their fire department, is subsidizing the EMS services that are provided on behalf of the area-wide. So that's clearly inappropriate, and you're not supposed to use service area funds outside of your service area or outside of their role. And the EMS goes up and down the highway all the way Indian down to Ingram Creek, and I think we're all aware that those are some pretty horrific needs in there. This source of funds feels a little rude, but we're looking at reduced mayor's office labor budget for special administrative assistant 2 positions. And my intent is that this would be take effect on July 1. We'll have a new mayor, and there are 4 special administrative assistant positions, and this would be something less than half of 2 of them. Though I'm open to other ideas on the source of funds.
Thanks. Ms. LaFrance?
Sorry, trying to get to my unmute.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that this is an item we discussed at the February Public Safety Committee meeting, and it also came up in March as well. And I believe Chief Weston from Girdwood Fire and Rescue is in the meeting if anyone has any questions. I just wanted to point out as well that AFD contracts with the Girdwood Fire and Rescue for EMS services along the Seward Highway from Indian South, as John mentioned. And Chiefs Hetrick and Weston, they worked together for 3 years to come up with this proposal. Or there were 3 years of negotiations, as John mentioned. And the bottom line is that Girdwood residents are paying for fire protection, but they're not getting it because the EMS response is what's taking the resources. And the increase would allow for dedicated EMS services, and it stabilizes it so that there would be always 2 people available at all times for EMS calls. It's a basic minimum staffing level, and it would ensure that there wouldn't be this loss, or help ensure that there wouldn't be a loss of fire protection to Girdwood. And providing that EMS response along the Seward Highway, it is a critical public safety function, and it would cost about at least twice as much, is my understanding, for AFD to absorb that function. So this is a really good arrangement for the municipality. And as it points out, I think in the amendment, it's not a special deal for Girdwood, but is something that benefits everybody. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so I'm next in the queue. So a couple of things. First is, so to the administration, doesn't have to be answered right now, but would it be the intent of the administration, should this amendment fail, that next year the full 300,000 will be in that EMS service contract as agreed upon? Because I'm still grappling with the prorated part and the arguments made by the sponsors. And then second is, I just want to note, a tradition of this body, that this body typically does not seek to make reductions from the mayor's office budget, and the vice versa is also held true. The mayor does not seek to make reductions in the assembly budget, and that's a long-standing tradition. So that is for me a big concern, and would like to see if another revenue source could be found for this. That's it from me. Moving on to Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. I actually got pulled away for a minute there. So if somebody else brought this up, I apologize. But given these are first responders, is there a pool of alcohol tax revenue that could be used on this, or are we prohibited because they were an existing program, or do we think that there just isn't alcohol tax available? I'm just thinking for this particular gap, this gap in 2021 specifically.
That's a fair question. My sense is that it was an existing service in a way, but on the other hand, it does provide a higher level that really is what we found is needed. I hadn't considered the alcohol tax, but that I don't know. I guess that's one for the administration to see if there's money or that's a possibility.
Yeah, I guess I would ask the administration to at least look into that, just because, I mean, this is first responders are very clearly laid out in the alcohol tax, and so this could fit pretty neatly. I also have some reason to be hesitant to cut mayoral staff. We'll see how that shakes out. But anyway, I'm curious if that might be a more appropriate source of funds. Perhaps the administration can review that before we vote on these. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Zalatil and I are kind of going back and forth have been on other sources of funds, and I will put one on the table that we've already talked about, and hopefully she will discuss an idea that she has that she's kind of alluded to. But for the purposes of why I'm in the queue, up above, I made a shift of $250,000, and then we levied $350,000. And so in between all of those categories, there probably is some funding left available that we can find from. And also, as I said, Ms. Alatil probably has some ideas about, we literally put together funding for grants for DV and child abuse, evidence-based grants, and we put money forward for other categories. And so I think there probably is some unspent funds just because it's taken us a while to stand these programs up.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any other discussion, we'll go ahead and move on to the next amendment. Weddleton LaFrance, number 2. Who would like to speak to this one?
I can kick this one off. Okay.
How about it, Suzanne?
Thanks, John. So we've had ongoing discussion concerning the Alaska Railroad's claim of exclusive use of the right-of-way along the tracks, as well as the impact on property owners and others in the municipality. And so this amendment proposes taking $25,000 to fund a portion of a 13-month public relations and media campaign to defend property rights along the rail belt. We as a body have passed 2 resolutions in support of efforts in the Alaska legislature to correct the issue of this exclusive use claim. And now the municipality has intervened as a defendant in a lawsuit that the railroad filed against the Flying Crown Homeowners Association, which is in South Anchorage. The lawsuit asserts the railroad's right of exclusive use of the right-of-way, and the right-of-way crosses the properties of the Flying Crown homeowners. So the $25,000 proposed here would again go towards public relations and a media campaign. It would help educate the public about the railroad right-of-way and how the right-of-way was transferred from the federal government to the state, including the misguided claim of exclusive use. And it would help the public understand the impacts of this claim as well. It would provide for education on the subject. It would help protect the municipality and the rights of property owners and the public interests. It could also help in controlling the issue of rising utility rates and possibly help improve the relationship with the railroad. The funding source proposed is to take it from funds that have been allocated for the municipality's lobbying efforts. And I will just add too that the amendment proposes allocating the funds to Winfluence Strategies, a public relations consulting and strategy firm owned and operated by Chuck Kopp and Cherie Curry, as they are the experts in this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I'm in the queue on this one. So I just curious for the administration, does this mean that we're going to have to change the lobbying contracts, and then what change would that mean, and what effect would that have? And in particular, I'm not interested in having a negative effect on our federal lobbying contract, because that is extremely critical that we don't mess around with that at all right now. That's it from me. Mr. Constant?
You basically asked my question.
Thank you. All right, not seeing anything else on this amendment, we'll move on to Weddleton LaFrance number 3. Who'd like to speak on this one?
Do you want to start, John?
Sure. So this one is pretty similar to what we did last year. Girdwood has taken on revising their area plan, which is 25 or 26 years old now, and so much has changed there in that time. It's much busier community. The resort is huge and growing, and the new owners are really pushing it as a more significant tourist destination. We've got, the things like the Forest Fair and the Slush Cup are bigger than ever. So it's really become a, recreational attraction for all of Anchorage, for residents, but also tourists. So it needs a plan to further develop. And with the city owning the majority of the developable land, it's important they're a little bit tied up trying to do things because they don't have a plan to guide that action. So the importance of the plan is immense, and the city the community there has taken it on themselves. So then they use the funds to hire Huddle to kind of help organize it, but this is hugely a volunteer effort, and this really good high quality group of people. So this 25,000 plus 10,000 will help them continue their work through this year, and they're doing the really heavy lifting now, which is setting the goals and priorities for the community, which with any area plan is really the hardest thing. And then following that, we do expect that there will be a need for more professional help to do the more detailed work on what infrastructure is needed and where, and watershed management issues and things like that get fairly complex, but they'll have a lot of the work done on the cheap with what they did last year and what they're doing now. We don't have a source of funds for this, so we'll continue to work on that. Last year we used assembly funds, but those are pretty much claimed up now, in particular as we saw with the hope to get some help for Dean.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, do I see right that you're in the queue for this one or the last amendment? You're on mute if you're speaking, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Yeah, it's both now. Mr. Weddleton raised a question to me on this one, but I do have a question on the previous item. And so for this one, the question is, how much did we previously appropriate for this plan?
We did 25,000 last year, and HLB put in 10,000, and essentially we're looking for the same thing this year.
So, I mean, I'm in a position where I have a neighborhood council asking for assistance with their neighborhood plan. I've been telling them this is just not what we do. And so this is a challenge for me, because if we're going to do it for one, we should be considering doing it for all. So we can talk about that. I'm not sure where to land on that, but so to the previous question though, and I think is Miss Vogel on the line by chance, or anyone from Legal D?
I know Miss Ennis was on earlier.
So are we actually in active litigation on the question of the railroad right-of-way?
This is Dee. Can I answer? We are.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we are in active litigation.
So does it create any kind of procedural weirdness if we are actively lobbying? Who are we lobbying? I mean, even though it says it's a PR campaign, it's really lobbying. And so do we have a problem with that if we are in a litigating claim?
Okay, and Kate, are you on the line, or I'd be glad to step in on this? She's more familiar. I will say we just had some memos, emails between our two attorneys who are working on this issue, and there was some concern about that. It appears that most of the legal issues are not factual. And does so who are we lobbying? I think that's an excellent question. Certainly not lobbying a judge who's going to make a decision on the legal facts. So I don't think it helps with our case.
Right. What's the timeline on that? Is this like the Court of Claims where it could be 1,000 years, or is this something that's more timely?
Right now they're in some limited discovery, and I think most people think it'll end up in a summary judgment format, which generally are much quicker, but then either side can appeal. So you're absolutely correct. Could take a couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
It's a legal issue, not factual.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the, okay, you have it back up, the amendment on the plan. I have a question for Mr. Constant. As I recall, last year, we had, me, and Mr. Riddleton may have co-sponsored an amendment that included funding for a neighborhood plan in District 1. And is the request that you received this year the same as the one from last year, or is this a new request? And I assume that if it's the same request, they have already spent the funds allocated from last year?
Yeah, no, they actually came at me with please get us $125,000 so we can complete our plan, to which I coughed up my coffee and then said, this isn't feasible in the current climate that we have. And so I'm not asking for more money. I just am concerned that we're now talking about increasing another $25,000 to $35,000 on top of the previous $25,000 to $35,000. And at what point is it our responsibility and the neighborhood, the community's responsibility? I don't know. And so I just want to make sure that this conversation is on the table and open, because many neighborhoods would like updates to their comprehensive plans. And so I just want to make sure we're hewing to the equity concerns.
Thank you.
Can I just add a bit, Chair?
Mr. Francis first, and then I'll go to you.
That's fine, thanks.
Oh, you can go, Mr. Riddleton. I was just going to follow up on what Chris said.
Me too, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I did just want to point out that this has been a phased effort, and we have provided funding along the way as the community has also engaged with fundraising. And I think too, given the tremendous impact this has on the overall, I think, economic recovery of Anchorage, because Girdwood attracts people, to the municipality, as far as, this is a really critical project, and we have seen the ongoing effort as well as that fundraising component by the community. So I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. And, for Chris's point, I do think that communities will need some financial assistance to do their own plans. You really do need some professional to pull everything together that is discussed at the various meetings, and also to help, community meetings stay on track, and whatever the topic of the day is. So we should expect that. So why, Girdwood over South Addition? And I don't know if that's the one you're referring to, but I know they were looking for help, and I was not aware of the status of theirs. But I think last year when we addressed this, they had not really started, and Girdwood was deep into it. But so Girdwood, there's a couple things that stand out. One is that they are proven themselves able to raise matching funds. So this does not fund all of their effort. They will get matching funds. They also have the unique situation where so much of their land is Heritage Land Bank land or city land managed by HLB, that this is actually a plan that helps the city broadly by helping HLB be able to dispose of their land and use it in ways that meet, the ultimate goals that will come out of the plan. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, seeing no one else, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, no, and the South Edition plan was planning far along. I've been working on it now for 5 years. It's just, at what point is the money most valuable? And I just want to make sure we're careful not to get in front and, I don't know how to express it exactly. So I'm not necessarily opposed, but I just want us to be very thoughtful.
Thank you. All right, seeing no one else, we'll go ahead and move on to Zolotel Weddleton number 1. Who would like to speak to this?
I can. So as you all know, we've recently been discussing the long-range transportation plan, which as proposed to us was just the Metropolitan Transit Plan with a different name. In working with planning, we've found that there's an interim way forward, which is to create a long-range transportation plan as an element of the comprehensive land use plan. By going through the Title 21 process, particularly as to goals, objectives, and proposed metrics, with the expectation that we look in 2022 to putting money forward for an actual full-on long-range transportation plan so that the long-range transportation plan could drive the MTP and not vice versa, because our goals and objectives based on the comments that were received to the MTP really indicate a different community sentiment than what's necessarily in the MTP, but the two need to be coordinated. And there's never been any money for a long-range transportation plan, none that I have seen. So this would let us go through the Title 21 process and kind of get us going. And then we could discuss how to move forward in a more holistic way in the next budget season. The source, my understanding is that there are funds remaining from the consultant that we had paid for the mobile crisis teamwork. Those funds, I believe, were CARES Act, but then were moved into general funds for the assembly. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'm sure maybe Mr. Weddleton has some follow-up because he is the expert in this area.
I hope I'm not the expert, but I know enough to stumble in and trip a bunch. We could wait and do a full-blown LRTP, but the problem is we will be behind on the MTP 2050 work once again, and it will have already set its own goals and objectives before we would finish a full-blown LRTP. So this is really to get those goals and objectives lined up and in time to guide that MTP. What happened this last time is we're a little bit late on this one because we were late on the previous one, the one we just saw and adopted, because we got in late in the game and started changing things up. And if we don't get this done quickly, that could happen again. And we're already a year late on the MTP 2050, which is critical. It's, that is really more of a funding mechanism for our transportation system. And we have to meet FHWA guidelines, but that's what it's for. It's not for guiding ultimately how we build our roads and where we build our roads and so on. So this is needed, and it's needed fairly quickly. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm in the queue. So we have a work session on the LRTP next Friday, and then I believe it's back before us on May 12th. So can you tell me how this amendment is in relation or not to the actions that we have coming before us soon? I'm assuming that because this amendment is coming forward, and maybe you addressed this and I missed it, that there is not current staffing to do the work that we are hoping to do. And then 3, just a quick note on the funding source. If it is possible for the sponsors to come up with another funding source, that would be great. Currently, I'm actually looking at moving some dollars around in our budget to finish paying for the Chugiak Eagle River offices, and this might make it a little bit more difficult for me to do that. Okay, otherwise, turn it back to the sponsors if you want to address any of those points.
Sure. So on the timing, we do have the work session, and we have basically written a version of an LRTP ourselves, John and I, restating goals and objectives. This would move that work forward into planning with staff to refine it, run it through the Title 21 process. And no, they do not have staff to do this. We would then have to postpone that item. I don't believe we're under any time constraint in terms of code to adopt the LRTP. It is just simply something we would hope to do to stay out in front of the MTP development of goals and objectives for the 2050 MTP. So this would be what planning would need to get us through that process. And I believe if everything went smoothly, I think we were looking at approximately 60-ish days, 60 to 70 days. And of course, that's on the, if everything goes very smoothly, track, and then it would come back before the body. So it would be a postponement of the current item if this were to pass and we had the opportunity to do that. In terms of looking for another funding source, can certainly work on that.
Thank you. Want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Kennedy. Any other questions on this one? Okay. Well, I guess since Ms. Kennedy, you're here, I'll go ahead and go back to our first amendment, Kennedy number 1. And I just recap of the conversation that we had. I just did a quick read through of the amendment, and there was one question from Mr. Peterson about what the health department would need to do to make that $11,000 budget cut or shift. But otherwise, there was no other discussion that I remember. Did you want to speak to this amendment at all?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just really briefly, because I'm still trying to get a really solid number in terms of how short they are for their budget this year. They've given me some information that says they're about $400,000 short of regular revenue. Then there's another $90,000 of additional expenses. So again, they're trying to figure out how much they haven't made this year, but how much their expenses still are. So anyway, the $20,000 was a number that I took from last year. Plus, earlier this year, they told me that they thought it was going to be around 20,000 again, but it looks like it might even be higher. So anyway, I'm still trying to work on really nailing that down. But all of it is due to the higher insurance costs for their employees this past year. So anyway, the reason why I took it out of the health department is because that's who this, the senior centers are under the health department. And anyway, and then the rest of it, comes from what I will not be using from my assembly aid and my assembly account. So anyway, so I'm hoping to have an even better number next week. But for what I know now, they have a significant shortage. So thanks.
Thank you. All right. So looking forward to seeing the administration's responses to all of these questions. And then if any members want to make any changes to their amendments over the next few days, please work with Desiree to get those in. Ms. Zolotel?
Yes, thank you. I have one more general question as it pertains to the alcohol tax budget and whether or not the positions identified for the health department in administering the funds, as well as in Treasury for administering and the alcohol tax have been hired, and if they are, fully utilizing the full year or not. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Hopefully the administration will add that to their list. And so we'll have a lot of work to do between now and Tuesday. Looking forward to the, I'm sure, extensive deliberation on these amendments on Tuesday. Please feel free again to reach out to Desiree or to OMB if you'd like to further refine your amendments. Otherwise, I will go ahead and close this work session. And I think this is the last one we have today. I'll wish everyone a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Felix.